Tonight we're at New Year's Eve, which is the end of the church's liturgical year, not our Julian calendar year. And like the end of the year and the end of many of our endeavors, we often take time to reflect back and see and ask the question, which I call the Ed Koch question. I know Ed knows who Ed Koch is. Anybody else know who Ed Koch was? Most of you. And the Ed Koch question was always, what? How am I doing? Right. And I always was intrigued by that. And of course, as an elected official, Ed Koch's answer in the long term always came at the ballot box when he would get okay or not okay, as all elected people do, and we as well at some point. And so asking the question, however, means there has to be a standard to be measured against. Otherwise, how do we know where we are? And today's gospel, often called the Last Judgment, scary words indeed, sets forth the standard that we just enumerated as presented by Jesus. Did you feed the hungry? Did you give drink to the thirsty? Did you clothe the naked, welcome the stranger, visit and care for the sick and those in prison? This is the gospel call, which the church calls the preferential option for the poor. And the preferential option for the poor, we need to know who the poor are. And Jesus says it clearly, irrevocably, without question, who the poor are. And they are the least among us. And indeed, under the preferential option for the poor, the least among us have first claim on all our time and talent and treasure. As I've shared with you many times, this is the gospel I picked for my funeral. And the reason I picked it is because for me, it's a daily reminder of what I am called to do, how I am called to live my life. It's my duty, my obligation, and my responsibility to be faithful to that gospel call enumerated in this gospel very clearly. That call began at my baptism, as it did for anyone who is baptized. And that call will only end when I die. It will only end when I die. So every day between now and whenever God calls me home, that's my duty, my obligation, and my responsibility. I indeed have been blessed to try my best to be faithful to that call, as I have also shared many times with you, because of these three words: faith, family, and friends. I've been blessed by so many of you here, many here today, but those here at Trinity who continue to try their best as we journey together in the many ministries which we have here. Our pantry, our sandwich group, our soup kitchen group, indeed Feed the Hungry, our adult education, our faith formation program, RCIA, they slake the thirst of people who have a spiritual thirst to know more about God. And that's their job in that ministry. Our Giving Tree and Adopt a Family, which we're in the midst of right now, indeed not just offers toys, but very often clothes, maybe not the naked, but certainly the near naked, as I review the list. And what do they ask for? Gloves, socks, scarves, warm jackets, so they may not be naked, but indeed they are cold. Our Eucharistic ministers and cancer care ministry people visit the sick, our prison ministry people. Even though everything is suspended now, we're regular visitors at Central State Prison in Rahway. And our Peace and Justice and Right to Life Committee advocate for those who have no voice. All our worship ministries help lift up our spirits to enable us and charge us with the Spirit to be able to accomplish all those ministries, to answer the gospel call. Are you resolved to do better as we begin a new liturgical year next week with the Advent season, which begins then? My experience here, working in the rectory, and perhaps yours as well, is that I think COVID, certainly in Westfield and many other places, has touched the compassion and generosity of many. Our scout drive last week yielded the highest number and amount of donations ever in the Scouts' history. Back in May in town, I have never in my 50 years here at Trinity seen so many food donations. If you were in the sorting there, you'd see they filled the gym. It took us days to sort and stock that food. And so that compassion of the people here in town, many faith traditions, I think, speaks loudly. Indeed, their deeds speak words of affirmation, not of acrimony. They speak of accomplishment and not accusations. Their attitudes reflect the gospel beatitudes. I like to call them the how-to-be attitudes, because that list in the Beatitudes are the measure, guide, and path for us on our journey. Those how-to attitudes are so important, more important than ever in our divided world. And so I ask you the Ed Koch question: how are you doing? How are you doing? And as you answer that question, do you see yourself among the sheep, or are you among the goats? There are consequences to how you answer that question. As I reflected on this gospel, this thought came to my mind. It's that Jesus has really outsourced the judgment, the last judgment. And it will be in the faces of the least among us, the poorest. That judgment will be voiced and visited upon us in their faces and in their voices. And how we see them, whether we see them, how we hear them, if we hear them, will be the judgment of ourselves. I think that when God calls us home, we're standing there face to face with God. I really don't believe that God's going to say, all right, Roland, you're good, you're no good, sorry. I think he's going to ask each and every one of us the Ed Koch question, and it'll be put to us this way: how do you think you did? And the real judge of whether we go to the sheep side or the goat side will be up to us, looking into God's face. Because when we're looking into God's face at the last judgment, We will be looking into the faces of the hungry, the thirsty, the poor, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. And face to face with God, we better be ready to speak the truth. And so the Ed Koch question, how did you do? How do you think you did? It's going to be one of two things. How will you judge yourself on that day?